base. Okay, this is Rosh Hashanah's Shia. The Alter Rebbe asked the Kasha, that it says that Moshe Rabbeinu's Hasaga was only in Atzilus, Acharayim of Chachma and Bina and Zoh, and the Pnimius Hasaga of Moshe Rabbeinu was only in the Him. In Netzach, you said Malchus of Atzilus. And the Alter Rebbe asked the Kasha, how could it be that the Mekubalim, like the Arizal, Nabshem Bayachai, were masik much higher than Moshe Rabbeinu and the Nevi'im? This is the Kasha that the Alter Rebbe asks. So he says like this: Acha'inyin hu pashat umuvan lakar. It's understood very simply to explain the difference between Nevuah and Ruach HaKodesh, between Moshe Rabbeinu and the Mekubalim. You want to do Tanya? Okay, so the Yesh Hafresh is a great distinction. The Hefresh got a great distinction between the Sagas Chachmei Emes Kirashbi Varizal, between the Saga of Mekubalim like Kashbi Varizal, Shehi Sagas Chachma Vadas, which is a reach of Chachma Vadas, of wisdom and knowledge. Ubein Sagas Moshe Rabbeinu Olav Shalom Mash'an Nevi'im, and the reach, the access of Moshe Rabbeinu and other Nevi'im, which is called Benevuah through prophecy. Which is called in the pasuk the Iyah Mamish, like it says in the pasuk. You'll see my acharayim. Then there's the pasuk in Tanakh that the Navi Yishai saw Havaya, and then of course it says in Vayera Elav Havaya that Avraham Avinu saw Vayera. The Eibush, and of course, why the Alter Rebbe brings 3 psukim and this say that this is homework? That va'af shezeu derech mashal. Although this idea that the Nevi'im saw the Eibush, there is also only a mashal. Ve'ein re'iyas ayin basar gashmi mamish. It's impossible to say that even Nevi'im saw the Eibush with their physical eyes. The Eibush does not look like anything. Mikol makom still. When we say that Nevi'im saw the Eibishter, what's called the Re'iyah, even if it's only a mashal, the mashal has to be consistent with the Nimshal. Ketargum, like it says in Targum Unkel, is Vayera Elav Havaya, that the Eibishter Havaya revealed himself to Avraham Avinu. So he doesn't say that Hashem was seen by Avraham Avinu. It says that Avraham Avinu, the Eibishter revealed himself to Avraham Avinu. Shu Bechinas is Galos, which is a concept of revelation. Shenigla Elav Hanelam Baruch Hu, that by Nevi'im there was a revelation of a lakus which is hidden. The Bechinas is Galos, which in a revealed state. Masha'en Kain Basagas Chachmei, as opposed to Kabbalah. Let me use fancy words. The Maimarim say that Nevuah is called the Re'iyah Chushis. Re'iyah Chushis means to see vividly. Ruach HaKodesh, the saga of the Mekubalim, was called Re'iyah Sichlis, seeing intellectual. It's a madreg of Chochmah. There's a very big difference between a Re'iyah Chushis and a Re'iyah Sichlis. In some places of the Hasidus it's brought that there's a Yisrei, there's a Meile in Gashmi Zekiriyah over the Re'iyah in Gan Eden. You have it in V'yidaita Moskva, you have it in Eter, which is the same Maimah V'yidaita Moskva, that there's a Meile in seeing something B'Gashmi or seeing something B'Ruchnius. Because when you see something B'Gashmi, you see it actually. When you see something B'Ruchnius, in Ruchnius you don't see anything. You understand things, you relate to things. When you relate to something very, very well, if you relate to it extremely well, it's called I know it so well, it's as if I see it. It's called a Re'iyah Sichlis. And when you see something in Gashmis, it's undeniable. It's a Re'iyah Chushis. It's actually seeing it. B'chush. In Ruchni is no such thing as Re'iyah Chushis. So it says in Chassidus that Nevuah is Re'iyah Chushis. When a Navi sees, it's not, he has a Hasaga and a Lakus which is clear like seeing. He sees godliness. Whatever the Avana is, he sees godliness. As opposed to the Baleroch HaKodesh, the Ashbi, the Arizal, this is a Re'iyah Sichlis. They understood Seydus HaTorah, they learned the Chumash, Mikra, they understood from the Mikra Seydus HaTorah, and their clarity, their klarkai, was like as if they're seeing, but it's a Re'iyah Sichlis, it's not a Re'iyah Chushis. It's an intellectual vision as opposed to an actual vision. So the Alter Rebbe's point is, Moshe Rabbeinu saw only Nehim of Atzilus and Ephraim Pnimis. But he saw the Muchash, he saw himself, he saw Getlachkeit. The Baleroch HaKodesh, the Mekubalim, they saw much higher, but it wasn't seeing, it was understanding. Understanding with such a clarity that it's called seeing, but it's not actual seeing. You see the difference, right? You see the difference between this seeing and this seeing. Very good. It says that as opposed to the reach, the intellectual reach of see Ein Sof. There wasn't a Gilead of Elikus in a Riyah Chushis. The Bechinas is Gals in a revealed way. And actually, they understood intellectually Talumes, Chochma, Hanelam, or Benelam, or Mufla Mehem. They were able to understand what's hidden in the hidden recesses of Chochma, that's Nelam and Mufla, hidden and wondrous from them. In other words, they were able to understand very, very high Madregas, but the Madregas they understood, they didn't see it clearly. They understood it with such clarity as if you're seeing it. In other words, in simple words, when a Navi sees a Nevuah, he sees Getlachkeit. When a Chacham learns Torah, right? You learn Torah, you understand words. When Ashbi learns Chumash, Ashbi learns Mikra, Ariza learns Mikra, he understands Torah from the Mikra. Mikra, I mean Chumash, Teresh B'Ksav. But it's a process of limud. You learn the Torah, and if you have the right mind, and you have Ruach HaKodesh, and you have a very Edel Aguf, so by learning Mikra, you could appreciate Torah. But it's an intellectual process. It's a process of Seichel. The highest Madrega of Seichel is Re'iyah. But it's connected to Seichel. As opposed to the Nevi'im, there was Mamash Ariyah Chush, and they saw godliness b'muchash. Which in fact explains the Gemara. The Gemara says that it's true that a Chacham has a mile over a Navi. Why? It's possible that a Navi should reach intellectually through his Chachma higher and even higher from the steps from this that could be revealed. The Bechinas is Galus in a level which was revealed Leneviim to prophets, was the vision of prophecy. A Navi cannot see as high as a Chacham, but a Chacham is seeing it with his Seichel, and a Navi is seeing it b'chush. So therefore, Nevi'im are higher than Chachamim. Moshe Rabbeinu was higher than Ashbi and Arizal. Fact was that they understood Madregas and Elokus, which Moshe Rabbeinu did not see, because Moshe Rabbeinu was a Riyah Chushis, and by other Nevi'im was other Chacham was a Nevi'ah Sichlis. So there's my mother. I thought in Ayin Tes it's in the Maimed, and it's also in Ayin Beis in one place, that it says that there was a Maila in later Nevi'im of Moshe Rabbeinu. Our Tanya is talking about the Maila in Chacham over Navi, right? That the Mekubalim understood more than the Nevi'im understood, because since they were not seeing godliness b'muchash, they were only understanding it, they understood much higher. There's my modern that there's a Maila in other Nevi'im of Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Moshe Rabbeinu is such a high level that when he saw Nevuah, he had very little to say. Other Nevi'im were on a much lower Madregah. So when they saw Nevuah, they saw much more details. For example, you have the Merkava of Yeshaya and the Merkava of Yecheskel. For those who care, Merkava of Yeshaya is the Haftarah Pasha of Tishrei, and the Merkava of Yecheskel is the Haftarah of Shavuos. When you read the same Pasha, that's the difference. The Merkava of Yeshaya is a few psukim. The Merkava of Yecheskel is pages. Why? Yecheskel is on a lower Madregah. Because on a lower Madregah, he noticed the furniture more. That's how it works out. He saw the Chayas, and the Fanim, and the Rakia, and the Chashmal. Yeshaya was on a higher Madregah. He saw Lakus. So he paid less attention to the furniture. He didn't see the Merkava, he saw Lakus himself. Moshe Rabbeinu was even on a higher Madregah, so Moshe describes nothing. Moshe doesn't talk to you about how the Eibishter looks, doesn't talk to you about the Shechina, the Merkava. In other words, it turns out that the Chasadim becomes a Maila, lower Nevi'im. Because they saw less, they describe more than we have more Kabbalah from Yecheskel and Yeshaya than we have from Moshe Rabbeinu. And by the same token, we have more Kabbalah from Arizal and from Rashbi than we have from Yecheskel and Yeshaya. Because since they were seeing the Lakus less directly, so they were describing it in more Seichel de Ka'oisis. There's more to grasp, there's more to talk about, there's more to understand. So Al Rebbe continues. And when it comes to Nevuah Mamish, in other words, what's called the Riyas Alakus B'chush, is seeing godliness vividly, it could not be revealed. Rak Madregas Atachtein is only the lowest levels. Shehein Nehim, which is the lowest Madregas of Atzilus. Shehein Hein Hayer Tameh, the lowest levels of Atzilus are the ones that descend constantly, Umizgalas, and reveal themselves, Me'amashpil U'makabel, from the Eibishter to the creation. The Bechinas Meichen V'chayis, to be the Pnimius of the lower worlds, right? Meichen V'chayis means the Pnimius of the lower worlds. Nehi of Atzilus becomes the Pnimius and the Chayis of the lower worlds, and that's the only thing that Nevi'im were able to see. It's not a Pikabala. Shahanehim, Netzach Hajisayid Malchus, Shala Elyon, the lowest Madregah of the one above, mislapshim. The translation of the word mislapshim is, it's revealed. Betacht in the lowest level, to give it life. In other words, shehein. Shehein in the day are kli hashpa, the vehicles of hashpa, of giving a flow of life. Ve'erodas hachayis, and the descent of life, mehelli in the tachif, from the higher level to the lower level. B'chol ha'elameis v'amadreges, and all the words and all the levels and steps. Says the Alter Rebbe, and therefore, since Nehi, which is the Chetenius of Atzilis, is the union of Gilui, of Elakus, of Ein Sof, this was what revealed to Nevi'im in a revealed way. In other words, like this. If we were not Lamdim, and being a Lamdim is a problem, because the truth is not even Lamdim, we're Lamdim enough to be confused. But if we were not Lamdim, how would you describe Nevuah? Nevuah means seeing the Eibusha. That's what it means. Nevuah is not about Hashem having a message. Communication with the Eibusha and the world does not require Nevuah. It says in Rambam that Hashem came to Lavan. Hashem came to Avimelech in a dream. Yeah, and according to many days, Hashem came to Bilam. There's a lot of days about this. It wasn't Nevuah. Hashem spoke to them. In other words, they got a message from God. There's Sfarim on the table. How they got that message, I don't know. But it wasn't Nevuah. Because Nevuah is not Hashem tapping you on the shoulder and say, here, I have a message, go pass it along to Chazkel. The Ikir of Nevuah was the Chazoin, the vision. Chazoin is Lashon Targum. The earlier Nevi'im, it doesn't say Chazoin. It says Anochi Arayah in Hebrew, as they state in Sichas. The earlier Nevi'im were called the Rayim. Shmuel Hanavi was called a Rayah. Reish Vav Aleph Hey. The later Nevi'im were called Chayzim, Chazoin Yeshayahu, Chazoin Evadia, and so on. They saw. The Ikar Nevuah was the vision. They saw. And again, if we were not scholars, we would say that they saw the Eibishter. But of course, unfortunately, we think we're scholars. Everybody understands that it's impossible to see the Eibishter, not because kill it on the Machai, because it's going to kill you, because the Eibishter doesn't look like anything. So we therefore, Nebuch, we got complicated. Seeing the Eibishter means seeing Getlachai, seeing Ein Sof. And you know what? Seeing Ein Sof is also impossible. How can you see infinity? How can you see Pshitas? So, philosophy notwithstanding, in other words, whatever the Lumdus is, Nevi'im saw Ein Sof B'chosh. They saw Getlachai, they saw Ein Sof. The Balador HaKadosh didn't see Ein Sof, they understood it. And they understood it on the level of an ear. It was clear like as if they saw it, but it was a Hasaga, not an ear. So it's not a surprise that the Ruach HaKadosh, that means Mukubalim, reached higher Madreges than the Nevi'im, because this is Hasaga and this is an ear. And like I mentioned to you before, in the Nevi'im themselves, the greater Nevi'im saw more of the Etzem of Elokus, and therefore they communicated less. The later Nevi'im, who saw less, gave us more than the earlier Nevi'im. Says the Rebbe, so Nevi'im experienced, the Lashon is, the Pnimius of a Nevuah was Nehim. That's it. Now, however, inside the Nehim of Ein Sof, which the Navi had in a state of Gilui, there was in a state of Chitzenius and Acherayim, Melubash Eira Bina. This is the same words Alter Rebbe used in the Eder Rosh Hashana de Keshir. There was hidden the light of Bina, She Bechinas Havanas Elokus, which is a level of understanding godliness, May Eir, or Ve'er Ein Sof Baruch Hu. Now remember, when you say that a Navi, through Nehim, had a Shayches to Bina, this is not a saga, this is not the understanding part of the Ein Sof of Bina, this is the Ein Sof part of Bina. The Chochma, and inside Bina you have the rear, the back of Chochma, which is beyond wisdom and understanding in Elokus Baruch Hu. And remember, in all of these Madreges, since we're talking about Nevuah and not Ruach HaKodesh, Nevuah means they didn't see the plumbing, they didn't see the furniture, they saw the godliness. The Elokus of Nehim was Bepnimius, and in the beginning he said Zoh and Bina and Chochma and Efin B'Charayim. What this means, I don't know. You can do it for homework. Kishem Chochma Meira, because the word Chochma indicates Al Makeda Seichel Havana, the source of Seichel Havana. In other words, Chochma is higher than understanding, and it's the source of it, like it says in Tanya, that it's Hulavad Yuvein Zolasi. Chochma Yavin So. That's why it says in the Zayah, the Reisa Me Chochma Nafkes, because Teira comes from Chochma. Stop. Moshe Rabbeinu was a Navi, right? In other words, he saw Ein Sof B'chosh. He saw God as in a vivid way. part of the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, and this itself is very far from simple, because Torah is not Nevuah. You know, Moshe Rabbeinu was a Navi, and Moshe Rabbeinu was also the Neis of Torah. It's not the same function. Moshe Rabbeinu was Nevuah like any other Navi. It was in a higher Madrege. Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who gave the Torah, was a Mashpech. The Eibusha spoke through him, but Pashtus. So, the Alter Rebbe here doesn't make a distinction between Nevuah and Torah, but in a lot of Sichas and also in Rambam, a distinction is made between Torah and Nevuah. But the Alter Rebbe doesn't make this distinction. He says, Moshe Rabbeinu saw Ein Sof of Nehim of Atzilus. And through the Ein Sof of Nehim of Atzilus, he saw the Chitzenis of Zod, the Chitzenis of Bina, the Chachma. That was it. Says the Alter Rebbe, Ki taimei mitzvahs leinas galu. And this explains why the true reasons for mitzvahs were never revealed to us. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the Torah. Torah is the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's how the Alter Rebbe is learning. In other words, the Ein Sof that Moshe Rabbeinu saw, which was Nehim, that was infused with Bina and Chachma, the Chitzeis of Chachma, this is what Moshe Rabbeinu got Begilu. Moshe gave us the Torah. In the Torah we have what Moshe saw. What did Moshe see? The Nehim of Atzilus with the Bina and the Chitzeis of Atzilus, Chachma of Atzilus. What Moshe Rabbeinu gave us. Torah is much higher than what Moshe Rabbeinu saw. Since Torah is much higher than what Moshe Rabbeinu saw, what Moshe Rabbeinu saw, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't see and didn't give us, is not in the Torah that we have. It's part of the Eibishter's Torah, but Moshe didn't see it, and Moshe couldn't write it down, and Moshe couldn't give it to us. And this is the pshat what says in Chazal, time may mitzvahs leinas galu. The real reason of mitzvah not revealed because Moshe Pasha didn't see the pnimius of Chachma Vatzilus. He saw only the Chitzeis of Chachma Vatzilus. Ve'im l'maylo me'asecha va'avana, the beyond wisdom, beyond understanding. In other words, the beyond the madrega of Ein Sof, which Moshe Rabbeinu saw. And even in those places, that it's revealed to us, and it's explained and exposed and expanded to us. A reason for mitzvah, says the Alter Rebbe, what we have a gishmakin, and what we understand, this alone is not it's not the end, the ultimate reason, or the ultimate end of understanding. Inside of it is melubish pnimius v'talumis chachma, is hidden or is revealed the inner and the hidden madregas of chachma shelamaylo me'asechol v'havana, which is beyond wisdom and beyond understanding. So the Alter Rebbe is saying something very interesting and very controversial. Torah Ein Sof. We got the Torah through Moshe Rabbeinu. So Begilui, our Torah cannot have more than Moshe was able to get. There was more in it, and Moshe didn't get it. And this is the reason why time made Torah leinas galu, because Moshe didn't see the time made Torah. This is what it says here. It's a big pella. Now, to be sure, even what Moshe didn't see is also in the Torah, and even what Moshe didn't get is also in the Torah, but it's in a state of hell. So a yid cannot reach the tachlis hatam because the memutza, so to speak, the lavush to which the Torah was given was Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe's nevuah was limited to this. It's a big pella, but this is what it says here. And he continues. And for the same reason, just like we cannot know Taimei Torah, because we're, so to speak, bound by what Moshe Rabbeinu was able to see, b'derech nevuah of the Chochmah and Bina of the Eibishter, the same is true in another thing. He gives several more examples. Every single word that's written in the Tanakh that the Eibishter spoke to the Nevi'im, what are the words of Techacha? What does Techacha mean? Wolf. What does Techacha mean? Rebuke. That's not what Techacha means. Techacha means to show direction. Techacha means to weisen a weg. Vayochach means to show a path. Techacha, it's translated as rebuke, but it actually means to give direction. Musar means to give rebuke. Techacha means to weisen a weg. That's the translation of the word in Hebrew. So the words, when the Eibishter spoke to the Nevi'im and he gave them Techacha, Ve'hein Sipurim Maisis, as well as the stories in the Tanakh and even in the Chumash. Says the Rebbe, Melubish B'Teichem, what's revealed in them is Bechinas Chachmas Alakus, a level, a step of the wisdom of Alakus, Shalamaylo, which is beyond Masechel V'Avona, beyond wisdom, beyond understanding. Okay, now, and the Pshat is that a Navi gave us the word of the Eibishter based on his vision. Since He gave us the word based on His vision, and His vision was limited, what was beyond His vision is beyond our Hashana, Bepashtus. And therefore, you look at the Torah, you don't understand. In other words, the emes is there's more to the Torah than the Torah. The Eibishter gave the Navi more than the Navi got. But since the Navi's Chizayon, the Navi's Re'iyah was limited to these Madregas, Begiloi in the Torah is only what the Navi was able to see. And this also you have to work very hard to access, to get what the Navi saw. To get more than the Navi saw is B'chol a different thing. And he brings you an ayah. I'm sorry?
Why don't you see everything the Navi saw there?
Why don't you? Because you're not the Navi. But since the Navi saw it, it's begilint. In other words, you could be massing it. You could, through limud, understand it. But what was behelim from the Navi, the Alter Rebbe is saying, I'm not making this up, okay? I wouldn't make this up on my own. The Alter Rebbe is saying that what Moshe didn't see is time and Torah in his gallery. You cannot get it from the Torah, because even from Moshe Rabbeinu was in a state of hell. Now, of course, Chassidus is going to say that the time and Torah, which is laid in his gallery, was also sofkol going to be revealed. But this is the pshat in the Maimon Chazal. Time and Torah in his gallery, because Moshe didn't see it. And he brings you a raya, kinyin b'chush, minyan akriv aksiv. You see in Tanakh that words are written one way and pronounced a different way. Kri and ksiv, you have all over the Torah, right? You have many, many words which are like, for example, you have a loy with a vav and a loy with a aleph. You have a lot of places. Who was son of a loy anachnu? How many times Marisa? He spelled a loy anachnu. Huh? Lamed vav aleph. It's a kri and a ksiv. In the city they saved your headache. V'loy anachnu belong to him. V'loy anachnu no, we have no shaychus to him. And there's a lot of those examples of Kri and Ksiv, especially lois, Lamed Vav and Lamed Av, Saganza Lebedige Welt. And there's many examples. What's the pshat? You look at the words, you understand what it means by Pashtus, but the side is hidden from you, and the way the Rebbe is explaining it, because the Navi didn't see it either. And because the Navi didn't see it, you can't understand it. That's Bepashtus. The way we read it is the way it's revealed to us. And again, the Mashma says that that's based on what the Navi saw. It's beyond our wisdom and our understanding. This word as it's written, does not have an access, a vehicle, a garment, in the way we should be able to understand it. However, when we read it, as opposed to how it's written, it has a garment that allows us to understand. A third example, the first example he gave was Taimi Mitzvahs Leinis Galam. The second example he gives us is Divrei Chochan, the Sipuri Maisias. The third example is Ki and Ksiv. And now we'll give the fourth example. In Tanakh you have Eisias, Ravreves, Eisias, Beinles, Eisias, Eidas. You have the big letters and the little letters. Most of the letters are in between, but you have big ones and little ones. Shema Almei Law, they're a higher world, Eidas Misham Begili, and they're radiating from there in a revealed state. Beli Levush, without a garment, Kishat Eisias, and therefore the son of Eisias, Ravreves, Eisias, Eidas, we don't understand. So this is how the Rebbe says, the Navi is seeing B'chush. The Navi sees godliness vividly. And when he writes the Torah, especially Moshe Rabbeinu, but also all the Nevi'im, they wrote down the Tanakh, they're writing what they saw. Since they saw only to a certain Madrege, there was a part of what they're writing down that the Pashtus, they didn't see, and therefore we can't understand. And Chassidus says that even this they can also understand it, but this is the very Ruach HaKodesh. This is where you say, Chachamodef Minavi, that the Bali Ruach HaKodesh, the Mukubalim, reached higher. But the Nevi'im had this Akbalah. This is what Alter Rebbe says. Okay.